The sun had already dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold when the sound of hooves echoed through the dusty plains. It was late, much later than anyone in Dry Creek would have expected anyone to be wandering, and yet there she was, Eliza, standing by the split-rail fence, her bonnet clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her eyes, wide and pleading, met his from across the yard, and in that instant the raw desperation of the West pressed in around them. "Help me! Stay with me tonight," she whispered, almost lost to the whispering wind, but the weight of her fear carried it straight to the rancher's heart. John Carter, a man whose reputation for stoicism and toughness stretched as far as the prairie itself, felt a stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years. He'd built his life around hard labor, long days and silent nights, yet in that instant he realized some things, some people, needed more than shelter and firewood. They needed presence, someone who wouldn't turn away when the world grew harsh. John didn't hesitate. He swung his coat over his broad shoulders and strode toward her, the sound of his boots crunching over the dry earth mingling with the distant calls of coyotes. Every step he took seemed to echo not just in the valley, but in the quiet chambers of his own heart, which, until now, he had thought he'd sealed off to any unnecessary attachments. Eliza, for her part, felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. She didn't know this man beyond the boundaries of the ranch, but something about the firmness of his gait, the unwavering look in his eyes, told her she could trust him. The West was full of dangers, the thieves who drifted in from neighboring towns, the sudden storms that could turn plains to rivers of mud, and the loneliness that gnawed at a person when night fell. But for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Eliza felt the glimmer of safety. As they approached the house, the warm glow of the kitchen lantern spilling onto the porch. John noticed the slight tremble in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. He gestured to the door. "Come on in. The night's cold, and this house has seen warmer company than the two of us out here." Inside, the cabin smelled of fresh bread, dried herbs, and the faint musk of cattle hides, comforting and real, a stark contrast to the open, wild chaos outside. Eliza stepped in tentatively, her eyes darting to the fireplace, where the last embers glowed faintly. Without a word, John knelt and added kindling to the flames, the crackle and pop of the fire filling the silence between them. She followed, settling into a chair with her hands clasped in her lap, watching him with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. For a while, neither spoke. The kind of quiet that fills a room with unspoken understanding stretched between them. It wasn't awkward, it was necessary. Both had come from lives defined by hardship. The West never offered easy paths or gentle nights, but in that shared silence there was acknowledgement of mutual respect, and perhaps something more. Finally Eliza broke it, her voice soft but steady. I don't know what I would have done out there tonight. The prairie isn't forgiving." John nodded, not with words, but with a slight tilt of his head, as if confirming that he understood. "It never is," he replied, low and calm, "but we endure. And sometimes you find help where you least expect it." The hours rolled on, and the two of them talked quietly by the fire, sharing stories of past storms, cattle drives that went wrong, and neighbors who vanished like ghosts. John told tales of his younger days, of long rides across unmarked trails and the harsh winters that had taught him to be tough, but not heartless. Eliza shared memories of her family's small farm, the long hours of toil in the sun, and the fear that had driven her to seek shelter here tonight. In the telling, something shifted. The loneliness that had wrapped itself around them began to loosen, replaced by a fragile bond that, in the wild expanse of the West, felt like salvation. Night deepened, and the wind outside whispered against the cabin walls, rattling the windows and carrying the scent of distant pines. John fetched blankets and stacked firewood, while Eliza moved to the hearth, warming her hands over the glowing coals. When she finally sat back down, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. The fear that had chased her across open fields dissipated into the warmth of the fire and the quiet, steady presence of the rancher. And when she looked up, she noticed John watching her with an intensity that went beyond concern. It was the gaze of a man who recognized strength in someone else, someone who had faced the same ruthless world and survived. Time seemed suspended in the small cabin. Outside, the prairie lay silent under a sky sprinkled with stars, each one a tiny witness to the unfolding moment. Eliza realized that tonight would linger in her memory, not for fear or desperation, but for the connection she had found. John, too, felt it, a subtle shift in the rhythm of his life. For the first time in years, he understood that heroism wasn't about brute strength or long days in the saddle. Sometimes it was as simple as answering a plea, as basic as offering warmth and company to someone who needed it most. As the fire burned low, John finally spoke, his voice cutting through the soft crackle of the embers. "You can stay here as long as you need. No one should face the night alone." Eliza's lips parted in a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, and in the quiet it sounded like a prayer carried on the wind. They settled into a companionable silence again, the room illuminated by the soft glow of the dying fire. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant river. But inside, the cabin was a fortress against the wild, a place where fears could be tamed if only for a night. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day, the adrenaline of fear, and the comfort of newfound safety coaxed Eliza to sleep, curled under a thick quilt, while John kept watch by the window, ever alert. And though the night was long, filled with the subtle creaks and sighs of the old cabin, it passed without incident. When dawn finally bled over the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold and soft lilac, there was a quiet sense of triumph, not over the elements or over danger, but over the isolation that had held them both captive for so long. They had endured, and in enduring together, they had found something far rarer than safety: trust, respect, and the beginnings of a bond that might last far beyond the wild night that had brought them together. As John prepared breakfast over the fire, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the cabin, Eliza watched him with a mixture of admiration and quiet affection. She knew that the memory of this night would remain etched in her heart, the night when a simple act of kindness, a willingness to act, had transformed fear into hope. "Thank you for staying," she said softly. John nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Sometimes the West teaches us lessons in unexpected ways. Tonight I learned one too, and as the first rays of sunlight spilled over the plains, illuminating the endless possibilities of a new day, the story of that night would linger, not just for them, but for anyone who understood that even in the harshest wilderness, humanity, courage, and connection could shine brighter than the fiercest sunset. If you felt the thrill, the suspense, and the heartwarming turn of this Wild West story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, join our growing family of story lovers, and never miss the next adventure where danger, passion, and heroism collide on the open plains. Every click supports the channel and brings you closer to the raw, unfiltered tales of the West that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Don't wait. The next story could be the one that changes your perspective forever.